Hi, and welcome to another episode of pianoTV. So today I wanted to just sit down and have a chat with you guys about something that I see sort of regularly in my studio in my time teaching, and that is writing down the letters of the notes. So for sure, reading music can be really challenging. Even beginner level pieces that kind of like look easy to read end up being a little bit more difficult. So when my students are trying to tackle a slightly more challenging piece, sometimes I'll notice that the music comes back the next week and all of the notes are written in with like the letter above it or below it. So the big question I want to talk about today is it okay to do that? Does it like cause any problems? So I want to discuss the pros and cons of writing down the letters. Just to show you what I'm talking about, here's some sheet music with all the letters scrawled in. This might be something you've never done or something you do all the time, or maybe just kind of somewhere in between. Sometimes you write down the letters. So do you think it's okay to do this? I think to answer this question, we have to make a pro-con list, and we're going to start with the pros. So probably the biggest advantage in writing down the letters in your music is that it makes difficult songs more playable. So a lot of the times when you're reading more difficult songs and you're looking at the notes, they're just like dense clusters of notes, and it becomes very difficult to decode. But if you write down all the letters, you don't have to focus so much on the notes. You can just look at your own code, and that makes it a lot more doable, even when you're not quite at that level yet. And when you're trying to read sheet music that's beyond your level, it's just like a little too hard for you to read. It kind of just like feels like agony. This has happened to me in the past before too, where I'm reading music and you just don't really get anywhere. You maybe make a little bit of progress, but it feels like you're trying so hard for so little gains. But then once your skills start improving, maybe like the next year, you look at the same piece of music and all of a sudden you can do it. So if you want to play those more difficult pieces before your brain can really handle those clusters of notes and like the more difficult note reading, you can write in the letters and give yourself your own code, and that does make it more doable, which ultimately to me I think is a pro. So I want to balance that now with a con. Writing in the notes can make it easier to play for sure, but it also can definitely become a crutch. When you write in the letters, you're not reading the notes anymore, you're reading your letters. So because of that, you don't get better at note reading. And not everyone cares about reading music, and that's fine. Like if you're one of those people, then by all means, like use your simulators and whatever you want to do. But the reason I encourage people to read notes right from the beginning, like even when you're like a little 6-year-old, is because eventually when you get to a point in piano, when you're playing more advanced pieces, it becomes almost too difficult to write in the notes because there's so many of them. So at that point, it's almost like if you're fluent in note reading, that is by far the simpler solution than trying to do something by ear or trying to, fill in all the blanks or follow a simulation. Reading music takes more upfront work. Like right when you're starting, it is much easier to follow a simulator or write in the letters, and it is much more difficult to actually read the notes on the page. But once you kind of start passing that beginner level and you start getting towards an advanced level, it can actually be a disadvantage to not have that foundation in reading music, because suddenly reading music ends up becoming easier than trying to decode it. And of course, if you haven't built up your note reading skills from a beginner level, reading music in advanced pieces is going to be basically impossible. It's like trying to read War and Peace when you've barely mastered the alphabet. Another con is one I see happen pretty often, which is human error. So you spend all this time writing it on all the letters and then you start learning the piece. But what happens if you wrote down some of the letters wrong? Like over here, these aren't G's, those are A's. What the heck was I thinking? So what'll happen is that you're probably going to end up practicing it wrong over and over again. So if you're reading sheet music, like with no letters written in, say you're reading this and maybe one day you play a couple notes wrong, but you don't notice. The next day when you're playing and you have fresh eyes and a fresh approach, you might notice, oh, hey, whoops, I was playing those notes wrong yesterday, and then you can fix it. So that kind of thing happens to me personally all the time. But what happens is if you write the letters down wrong, the likelihood of you self-correcting it is way more slim. You're a lot more likely to just keep reading the wrong letter, unless it sounds really bad, in which case your ear will correct it for you. But mistakes don't always sound bad. Something that I want to include in the pro column is the idea of writing down just a few of the notes. It can be a great advantage to mark down, say, like I've got here, the opening letters, and maybe some wild ones that seem like they're a little bit more difficult to figure out right off the top of your head. So from a beginner level, even with my very first lessons with students, we do this. We always look really closely at the first notes. We look at what fingers have to play those first notes, or in this song example I have here, there are no finger numbers. So maybe we'd sit down and take a look at that and maybe figure out a plan. Like maybe we start with finger number 4 here. And that gives us a really consistent starting point. To me, this ends up being the best of both worlds. It can simplify things a ton just by writing in a couple letters, but it doesn't get in the way of learning how to read the music. It doesn't become a crutch. It just ends up more of like an enhancement. So to throw another food analogy at you, think of it like salt. A little salt can make the whole meal go down better, but if you have too much salt, it's horrible for your body. So let's do a quick recap of the pros and cons. So the pros of writing down the notes are the difficult pieces, you can learn how to play them faster and a little bit easier. And writing in a few notes here and there makes the piece easier, but if you only do a few notes, you don't sacrifice your ability to read notes, so that's good. Now the cons are you spend less time reading the actual notes, so you don't get better at it. And if you write the wrong letter, you might not realize it's wrong for a while, and you might practice it wrong for a while. So ultimately, instead of saying like, do this, I'm going to leave it up to you. If you have zero interest in reading notes, then don't worry about it. Like, music is meant to be enjoyed, and we all enjoy it in a little bit of a different way. So don't feel like you have to learn how to read the notes or you have to stop writing down the letters. But if one of your interests or desires is to become better at reading notes, then I strongly suggest you don't write down the letters. Or if you do write down the letters, find a happy medium. Do a little like salt sprinkling. Instead of doing all of the notes, do, the first few notes or a couple of the challenging ones. If you're used to writing down the notes and you stop, there's definitely going to be some growing pains because reading music is hard. It takes a lot of work, but eventually you'll find like once you start getting more fluent, it'll ultimately open a lot more doors when you're playing at an advanced level. So now I want to know, like, let me know in the comments, is this something that you do or is this something that you struggle with? Or, have you always been really good at reading notes, or are you like, I don't need to read music. Like, I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below. So thank you for watching this video, and I will catch you guys next time. Writing in the letters can make a music, or can